Welcome to On Our Minds. I'm Dr. Russ Witcher,
And I'm Dr. Brenda Wilson.
and we are two journalism professors here at Tennessee Tech. On this podcast, we sit down with other faculty and talk academics, personal interests, and teaching experiences.
On Our Minds today, we're talking with Dr. Dennis Fennewald, Associate Professor in the School of Agriculture. Welcome, Dr. Fennewald, and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in your field of study.
Well, thanks for having me today. I grew up in central Missouri on a very diversified livestock farm. And so we had about 100 sows, 100 cows, 80 sheep. We usually had 5 to 10 horses, including Belgians and mules, and a dairy cow. So I grew up in animal agriculture and went off to college to study animal agriculture. So really, from the beginning, that's where my interest was.
All right.
I noticed here that you're an associate professor, but it looks like you're going to be coming up on full professor. Are you up for promotion next year?
So actually, I went up for promotion last year, and the committee wanted me to get more research done. I focus a lot on teaching students, advising students, outreach to the community, but they'd like to see more research and for me to go up to full professor. So that is what I'm working on right now.
Yeah, we had a faculty member who had that situation too.
Similar. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
As an example, let me give an example. A couple of things that I've worked on is we do some training for FFA, and we have what we call the fall clinics, and we have the spring clinics. And this might be livestock judging, horse judging, floriculture, that sort of thing. On Tuesday, we had 740 FFA members from 53 schools at Heidelberg's.
Wow.
So that is the largest group we had. And last spring, we had 600 FFA members. So it takes some time to organize it. It takes some effort to pull that off.
Yeah.
And since we started those in the fall of 2013, we have had over 7,000 FFA members come to Heidelberg's. So that'd be the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did was we charged them to come, but we give them a T-shirt. So they're paying for their T-shirt. Mm-hmm. But now we have over 7,000 T-shirts that say Tennessee Tech University on them that are on in the high schools around this, especially the middle part of Tennessee.
Right.
So that was a big turnout. Are you seeing that the enthusiasm for agriculture of Future Farmers of America and those types of programs are still going strong?
We really have a great FFA program in Tennessee. In fact, the Tennessee FFA Foundation is in our building, and Chelsea Rose is the executive there. Yeah. And her and her husband have a lot of interest in FFA. They were very active in FFA, and so they're trying to help schools across Tennessee have an active ag and FFA program. So really, Tennessee is quite active in that role, and we find that the high schools are hiring teachers, and we're finding that a lot of students are competing and attending leadership events and going on to be leaders in agriculture and other careers. So yes, Tennessee is certainly very active. 4-H is pretty active. FFA is certainly active as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 4-H. I enjoy going to the county fair and seeing all the exhibits. And since the pandemic, I saw a drop in the entries.
Right.
But it seems like maybe some of that is coming back and getting strong again.
Certainly, and real quick, I want to mention the Young Farmers and Ranchers program that Farm Bureau puts on, and so that's the next generation. Those that are 18 to 35 can continue to be a part of an agricultural group, and those would be the Young Farmers and Ranchers. But certainly, we did not have the clinics in the fall of 2020 and the spring of 21 due to COVID. Mm-hmm. And when we came back to have those, people were ready to be a part of something again. They wanted to be together as in a group, and they wanted to compete again and get their training, and they missed them. And so numbers went way up after COVID compared to right before that.
That's good. Mm-hmm.
I was looking at some of the classes that you teach. I had a question about one of them, aquaponics. I know what hydroponics is. What is aquaponics?
So for 3 semesters, I taught aquaponics. This is where you have fish in a tank, and I'm going to say the poo from the fish is pumped across the roots of plants, and those plants take up the nutrients, and that's how you're growing the plants.
Huh.
And so it was very interesting. On a small scale, we made it work just fine.
Yeah.
We didn't have the resources to scale it up bigger, and that's just fine. But the general principles of it, we did that for about 3 semesters, growing fish and harvesting a little bit of lettuce in float beds and that sort of thing. So we did that for 3 semesters. And there's actually some interest. There's another student who'd like to get the equipment out and try again.
Okay.
And he's very interested, and we'll get that out and help
Does
him.
that take up a lot of space?
Does not take up a lot of space, which
Okay.
is really nice.
That's the benefit.
What it really does take up is when you have a student who has that individual interest, it can eat up time of a professor or your staff. And so you're giving a lot of individual attention sometimes to a single student. And we do a pretty good job of that at the School of Agriculture, but the reality is that's what makes us unique, but that is also what makes it hard for us. It's not like we lecture and there's no labs. There's always labs to our classes. There's always labs because we put the hands on to it. So not only is agricultural STEM, so to speak, right? We got to have the science, the biology, technology, etc. But now we're going to do hands-on. And in this aquaponics, it was largely hands-on. So make sure your fish were fed and had oxygen. They do have to have oxygen. and so that's how those are keys to success.
Okay. And I guess you see the immediate if there isn't success, right? You see the failure's pretty clear too.
If you're out of oxygen, your fish has about 20 minutes, and that's about all you got. So,
All right.
yeah.
You had mentioned the FFA coming to these School of Agriculture clinics. My son is a future student of yours, so I decided to.
Okay.
And he's interested in the pre-vet program.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that, because I saw that you had a clinic in that as well.
Yeah, so we do, the clinic we did is vet science, and a lot of those students who come to vet science for that clinic at FFA, that is, some of those are pre-vet students, some want to be vet tech, some just enjoy it. Others, that's a really nice clinic for the teacher to put their first students in and say, hey, this would be fun, and get them active and get them engaged and get them into something. And so the pre-vet program that we have at Tennessee Tech, we've got a curriculum that will, if you get through that curriculum with about a 3.6 or 3.7 GPA or better, then you've got a good shot of getting the interview at the vet school so that you can get into vet school. And the thing that people need to know is if you don't have that GPA, there is an alternative for those with a little bit less GPA. But basically, if you want to go to one of the vet schools that's, say, Auburn, Lincoln Memorial, UT Knoxville, you need probably a 3.7 to get in. It's very competitive. They go through the applications. They look at about 200 of these. They'll interview 200 people, and then out of that 200, they only need 86. And that's every year. And so what happens is, and that's at UT Knoxville as an example, I think that's their numbers. But instead of 200 applicants, they might have had 1,000 or 2,000 applicants. So tons of applicants, and only a very, very small people get in.
Yeah.
And so you've got to have a pretty strong GPA, pretty strong, been working at a vet clinic, good letters of recommendations so that you can get that interview. If you don't get the interview, you don't get in.
Right.
Well, what would you like for people to understand about commercial farming, raising livestock, the food supply beyond the grocery store? What's important for us to know?
Oh, that's a great question. And we've discussed this actually before we started recording, but we'll just reiterate that there's a lot of people who are interested in backyard chickens or raising a few vegetables or that sort of thing. And they find out that the cost of doing so is fairly high. And so what I want them to know is there's reasons we do the things we do in agriculture. Some of it we want to do, some of it we're forced to do. And as an example, labor costs continue to go up. And so we used to, when I was a kid, we would put up small square bales of hay. Very labor intensive.
Yeah.
When the round baler came out, and my dad got one, I think in the 80s sometime, we reduced our labor needs dramatically, which reduced our labor cost. Now, round balers have a cost themselves, so we traded dollars for dollars to some extent. But the issue was, it didn't matter how much money you had for labor, nobody wanted to do it. And so it didn't matter because your students, your kids who would come and do this for summer help, for summer wages, they weren't even interested at any price. So now you're forced into the baler because of the way it is. In the 1970s, there was a drought in Russia, and they lost their wheat crop. And so they were buying wheat on the world market. And so price of all commodities went up. U.S. farmers were making wonderful prices, wonderful profits, and they bought land, they bought equipment, and then the drought was over in Russia. Prices all went back down, and farmers struggled to pay back all these loans. So they told their kids, go to college, get a job, don't come back to the farm. So now we have sent, this would be in the early 80s, we sent a lot of kids to college, said don't come back, there's no money in this. And so now we put pigs in buildings, huge buildings, lots of concrete. Well, that's a confinement hog operation. They're like, I don't like confinement hogs. Well, the reason is we don't have the labor to do raising pigs outside on forage, as an example. Okay? Same thing with chickens. We put chickens inside. There's reasons to do that. The temperature in a poultry barn is the same every day. The ventilation in that barn is the same every day. The chickens are not getting rained on. They don't have to fight off coyotes. They don't have to fight off the dogs, right? And so are there challenges with confinement chickens? Yes, of course. But there's some of the challenges is that we had outside. We've eliminated those. And the thing with labor on the outside, we've reduced our labor cost because they're in confinement. So it's not like one is better than the other. They're better in some ways. And we as a society need to know we're doing this partially for animal welfare and partially because we're forced into it because some things like labor cost don't go down.
Yeah.
It's really hard. Labor, everybody wants to see them to get paid more per hour or more as a salary, and they need it because the price of housing went up, the price of cars went up, price of insurance goes up. So all this cost associated with labor has gone up. Well, we're going to trade that by building buildings where we can manage large groups of animals and not have these labor issues. Currently, there's robotics that are milking cows because we can't afford the labor of milking cows. And so now there's robotics, mechanical engineering, whatever you want to say, they are milking cows.
Yeah.
And why? It's all labor.
Yeah.
It's all the cost of this labor. And so we all know when there's problems, there's almost always people problems. Right? Everything else we can kind of deal with. Some technology we can deal with. We can deal with a lot of other things. But the person has to show up for work every day. And they have to be capable of doing that. So we have to train them. And there's a lot of cost to doing all these things. And then at some point, you simply can't afford it. And it's cheaper to get robotics to do this. This came up during COVID. In New Zealand and Australia, they have machines that will disassemble a carcass. That's a nice way of saying what we do. You got to disassemble the carcass in a pork, lamb, beef plant. Well, if labor doesn't show up, they're going to get replaced by robotics because somehow you have to disassemble. And so that's already fairly common in a poultry plant, but now the other plants are thinking, how do I reduce my labor cost? Yes, robotics are expensive, but really when you think about what they can accomplish and they do it every single day, now that's your competition for labor.
Yeah.
That's labor's competition, I should say. So we do things in agricultural today, partially because we're forced into it, but partially because when we look at animal welfare, we look at some other things, this is simply more efficient. And so that's what we do. I've got no problem with raising tomatoes in your backyard. Go for it. You want chickens in your backyard? Go for it. But when you look at the break even of a dozen eggs in a backyard flock, I suspect it's 2 times what it is if you went to the store and bought it out of the store. Okay? So those are some of the challenges. The other thing people don't realize, a grocery store is there to make money. And so if they can get you to come in and buy meat that might be in the back of the store, then you're going to buy something as you walk through the aisle coming out of the store. So that's what we call, if they're selling it below the cost of production, then that's a loss leader. They might sell pork ribs this week at a loss and get you to walk through the store and buy cereal or toothpaste or something else that's a high margin item. So how does a farmer compete against a grocery store who's going to sell a product at a loss because they have such a diversity of products?
Right.
Yeah, I saw someone post on social media the other day that they had spent something like $50 to save $2 on tomatoes, growing tomatoes.
Right.
But, homegrown and fresh out of the garden is so good. So the benefit is just the taste.
Certainly, if you...
Not sure if it's worth paying $50 to save two, but yeah.
Certainly, if you like the fresher eggs, if you like the fresher tomatoes, or they taste better, there's all kinds of reasons that you might want to raise them yourself. Perfect ideas. But
As
the
a
break-even's
pastime.
probably higher.
Right.
Yeah.
I was wanting to shift gears just for a little bit. I saw that you've had 2 years on faculty senate. I've just cycled off of faculty senate for my 3-year term, and Dr. Wilson's coming on to faculty senate this year. What do you think the main issues concerning faculty, the faculty senate should focus on?
Gosh, that's a great question. There, always making sure that our salaries are competitive is always a good idea.
Yeah.
When you and one of the really big problems that I see is if your salary's not competitive, and you lose a professor as an example, and you have to replace them, it's probably a year before you replace them.
Yeah.
And when you think about a small school like School of Ag where you've got 10 faculty as an example, it's pretty difficult. It's pretty difficult for us to say, okay, you've been teaching animal science. We need you to teach ag engineering. Well, I'm not qualified to teach ag engineering.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not. And so, that's a problem for the students. It's a problem for the faculty and administration. The idea is it takes so long to replace a faculty member because you want a high quality person that it's not like, oh, well, you just in a company, you'd say, well, you've been second in charge. Now you're first in charge. We're just moving you up a step. That doesn't happen that way in academia. And so it's so much different than a business that somehow making sure that we at least keep the faculty as much as feasible is a good idea. And I know they're doing a feasibility study right now. They're looking at salaries and where do we compete against other schools. And it's not just how do we compete against schools our size, because the really good faculty have a chance to go to a land grant, which is bigger and will pay more. And some of them have the interest maybe in saying, well, I'm just going to go to industry and get paid more. Well, some of that you can't stop, but some of it you need to slow it down. And when there's lots and lots of turnover, you really have to say, why are these people leaving? How do we get talent to stay so that we can have a good program year after year after year?
Yes.
And that's how you keep the students coming through the door once a good program's been built.
The consistency. We've experienced that too, and it's
Yeah.
expensive in recruiting, but it's also time consuming when you have a small faculty for those few people to go through the process of finding a good colleague to come in. And when it happens, frequently it taxes the entire staff
Yeah.
of faculty. Yeah.
Absolutely. And in our case with 10 faculty, because a lot of committees at the university level want somebody from each school, we find we're on lots of different committees because we're such a small school that we can't just serve on one. We're going to serve on 2 or 3. And those are time-consuming things. And yeah, it's just a function of how do you reduce the turnover, I think is a really key point. And then how do you turn this in? And I think the administration has kind of spoken in such a way that they feel one of the ways we can maybe keep faculty is if we have more research done, more opportunities for those that want to do research, then we can keep those type of people. Now, I came to teach. I didn't come to do research. And with the amount of time I spend on individuals, like a person who wants to do aquaponics,
Right.
this means that it's harder for me to do research.
Yeah.
And so I've got to decide which of these things will I do? Will I do research and get promoted? Or how much time am I willing to spend with individual students?
Right. Time away from the students is
Right.
the cost of that.
There's a
Sure.
cost.
Well, I know, a lot of the courses you teach are for your agriculture majors.
Correct.
For the most part. So you may not have them ask you, why do I need to know this? But if you were speaking to, say, a general education student or an undecided student, why would it be important for them to know about your field of study? How does that enrich their life?
There's about 1.5% of Americans are involved in production agriculture, and that's what I teach about. When you've got such a small percentage of Americans who are in it, they are in it every day, that's their livelihood, then you realize that the other folks maybe don't really understand what you do, and maybe they don't even like what you do, and partially because they don't understand. And I'll give an example. In California, several years ago, there was something called Prop 12. And Prop 12 allowed everybody in California to vote on some matters related to animal agriculture. And they did. And if you can tug at their heartstrings, if you can do the emotions, then you can get people to vote a certain way, correct? And so what happens is they voted a certain way, and the ripple effect is this. One of the ways they voted was they said, we don't want gestation stalls for sows anymore. And so in California, you had to get rid of your gestation stalls. Okay, the ripple effect goes into Iowa, which is a major pork producer, who wants to sell pork raised in Iowa into California. And California said, you have to also eliminate gestation stalls if you want to sell pork into California. And so now Iowa has to do that. The other thing is Iowa might be selling pork to Japan or China. That pork is going to go through California into a shipping port to be shipped over to Japan or China. Now that pork has to be in a container that's probably sealed, that can't be opened till it gets to China. So there's costs that incur that maybe the public didn't understand. And they might not have liked the gestation stalls. That's fine, but I'm not sure they understood gestation stalls. One of the other things was we want the layers that are in cages to be able to stand up and spread their wings, all of them at the same time. If you've ever seen chickens, they never do that. Chickens will lay down next to each other, wings touching, because they like the contact of being next to another chicken, right? But what it did was greatly reduce the number of chickens you could put into a building. And when you did that, the cost of the eggs went up. Now, I don't know how well the public understood that or knew that. And in fact, where it was talked about as an animal welfare issue, some universities did the research and said, we have never seen a chicken, all the chickens in a pen, stand up at the same time, stretch out their wings, and of course not want to touch each other. That's not a thing. But that's how it was promoted.
Yeah.
And so, it's nice if, and I've mentioned this as maybe a education class, a general education class, how is your food produced? And so, wouldn't it be nice if students, the one thing they probably did 3 times a day, they actually knew where that food came from and how it got to them. And so it just seems like a very basic thing to know. Like, we want to know history. We want to know English. These are great. No problem. Maybe we should also know how our food's produced
Yeah.
and how it got to us.
Yes.
I was reading about your student recruitment for the school. I was impressed at all the places that you have gone. I'm from Red Boiling Springs. Not only have you been there, but you've been to Willette, which is a suburb of Red Boiling Springs.
You have to go through there.
How much of your workload is devoted to student recruitment?
I don't know the percentage, but I suspect I spend maybe 20% of my time on student recruitment. School of Agriculture does not currently have a recruiter. That is on the shoulders of the faculty. Of all the faculty, I probably have the most interest in it. And I have spent considerable amount of time traveling to different schools, to the state FFA convention, putting on clinics, trying to encourage students to come to tech, and not just School of Ag. I have people approaching me. I want to be in the nursing program. I said, we have a great nursing program. You want to be in chemistry? We got a brand new building. You want to be in engineering? That's what we do.
Yeah.
And so it's not just recruiting for agriculture, because I run across people who want to do other things, but certainly our goal is to get more people to come for agriculture. We're a very small school. We need to have the numbers. We have a lot more resources in terms of the farms than what we have in terms of faculty and students who could probably leverage that, so to speak. And so one of the things I did several years ago, I was asked to write a grant for a poultry house, which I did in the fall of 16. And Dr. Melinda Anderson and a guy named Zach Williams, Dr. Zach Williams, and I wrote that grant, and it was funded. So we put up a $2 million poultry house. And that house is now doing what I thought it would do, which is give all of our students way more hands-on. And as far as I'm concerned, it's easily the best poultry program in Tennessee. And so now it's a function of gathering those students in the Upper Cumberland and other places to come to us, because we have programs that lead to jobs. And if you go into the poultry program today, you'll start at somewhere around $50,000 or $55,000 with very good potential to move up in the company. And within a not very long period, you'll be going 70, 80, probably 90,000. I've got one student who's a plant manager today, and he makes twice what I do.
Wow.
And I'm very proud of what he's accomplished and what he's done. But there's potential there, and it's our job to have the programs to attract the students who then go out to those careers that we can put them into. I've got one student in Oklahoma who's now managing 13,000 sows with 39 people under her. And I have another student who's in New Zealand in the swine industry. And so we have contacts for the internships. We have contacts for these careers, and we just need to get students in and say, listen, if you can learn this, there's a career waiting for you in production agriculture. Now, hopefully, hopefully the student fits that career, right?
Right.
We don't try to put you someplace you don't belong because that doesn't work out for anybody. How much time in recruiting? I suppose 20%. How much time should I be doing? Well, there's nothing in my agreement of responsibilities that says recruiting per se, you should do 5%, you should do 10%. It doesn't say that. But I basically have not done the research, and I've substituted outreach and recruiting,
Right.
trying to get people to understand Tennessee Tech has a great ag program. We have wonderful faculty, and we want you to come here to learn from what we have.
Right.
And we have a pretty good program.
Yeah.
You spoke earlier about how in the 80s the war in Russia affected agriculture here in the United States. Is there a similar impact now with the Russia-Ukraine war? Talking about globalization and
Right.
how we're all connected, do you see it as dramatic as it was previously?
So one of the things that, if any of our listeners are in farming at all, will realize is in 2022 and 2023, fertilizer prices tripled. And so part of that has to do with that war and some other things. But when we're relying on fertilizer from overseas coming to United States, then if that supply chain is disrupted, we're going to find increase in prices. For the last couple of years, I have been working on a book that talks about forage management without the use of fertilizer. Because just like labor, fertilizer prices don't go down. Or they do go down, but they're going to go back up. And everything that you have to buy off the farm, whether it's equipment or fertilizer, or you need to build a building, or you have to hire labor, is getting so expensive that certainly if you're in, say, sheep, goat, beef production, you can't afford those things. And so the book I'm working on is how to do proper forage management to eliminate, not reduce, but eliminate fertilizer. It also eliminates equipment, by the way, so which eliminates putting the buildings up to put the equipment in. So all those expenses where a farm gets overcapitalized, I'm trying to show how they could be in the cattle business without all of those costs. And then we'll show economically how much better it is. Now, it's taken a couple of years to do that, but to your point, any operation that has to rely on off-farm inputs has got to understand what inflation is doing to their bottom line. It makes it harder and harder and harder to have what you might call a livable wage, that we can make money at this. And you would like to think the agri-companies are interested in you staying in business. No, they're interested in making money too.
Yeah.
And so they're going to increase the price of their equipment because they hired better engineers. And the better engineers cost more money. And they hired more labor to build more machinery. That's all great. That's all great. But at some point, the farm has to recognize that the new technology, the new equipment, the newer, bigger, better, the new paint, they can't afford it. And so they're either stuck with older equipment. As long as they can fix it and get parts, they're better off than to overcapitalize and buy a tractor that's too expensive or equipment that's too expensive.
Yeah. Well, I guess my last question would be, is there anything you'd like to add about the agricultural program at Tech and your involvement in it and recruiting and that type of thing?
Yeah, so on the recruiting side, we're going to continue to promote our poultry program. We've got 2 ag engineers. We've got some ag business. We've got a great poultry scientist, a young dynamic animal scientist, and a new agronomist. We have a lot of new faculty that's very exciting. They're wonderful to, the students come to me and they tell me how good they are as teachers and how much they're learning, and I'm excited about that part. I'm excited that we've got Shipley Farm and what that's been for for the students who have come through here. We've not leveraged to the extent I'd like to see it yet, but Oakley Farm up at Livingston is a great resource that we're getting to where we can leverage it. We've had some challenges in the past, but I think things are changing for the better, and that's going to be a tremendous resource for us as well. From the standpoint of what I do, I teach about beef production and sheep production primarily, but I also talk a lot about forage management. And the buzzword in agriculture today isn't really organic, which is kind of 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, or the word sustainable, which was 1980s, 1990s. We're now talking about something called regenerative agriculture, and some talk about regenerative grazing. And what this term means is that we need to follow the soil health principles put out by the NRCS that allows us to capture rainfall, water, infiltrate it into the ground, recharge aquifers, grow more forage, improve soil health, improve plant diversity for a more stable agriculture. Okay? Cows are actually really important to the planet. They're really important. And to maintain those grasslands, to maintain that organic matter, to keep the plants growing and healthy, ruminants are an important part of this. And so there's some people who'd like to get rid of cows, and that's a little bit of a reductionist idea. Hey, if we get rid of cows, everything will be okay. Well, if you got rid of cows, will you replace it with some other ruminant? Well, yeah, we'd put in bison. Well, bisons produce methane just like a cow does. They don't have a secret that the cows don't have. And so when you're just replacing a domestic animal that we can manage and eat, that upcycles a lot of forage into high quality protein, and you replace it with a wild animal that's a lot harder to manage, it doesn't seem like a good, smart trade-off to me.
Right.
There's some people who'd say, well, let's just grow more trees, as an example. Well, if you have a mature forest, my understanding is as trees are dying and emitting carbon, releasing that carbon they captured, then you have young trees that are growing and capturing carbon. You actually don't capture any more carbon. It's now in this flux. It's being released and captured at the same rate, essentially, such that the forest, once it's a mature forest, is done capturing carbon, so to speak. Okay? And so back to this, so people who want to see more trees, as an example, don't understand that if you go west of Kansas City, Missouri, and you get into the western drier parts of this country, there's actually not enough rainfall to support trees. So that's not the answer to what they think the problem is. And so as we think about ecology from an entire perspective, and we think about the water cycle from an entire perspective, more holistic, then this term regenerative agriculture gives farmers renewed hope that they are stewards of the land. And their job is to follow these soil health principles to improve the water cycle. And if we improve the water cycle, we've got more soil organic matter, which is a sponge that soaks up water. And until it gets saturated, it will reduce flooding because it's a sponge that's soaking up water. Now, once it's saturated, then that water's going to leave, right? And the skill that the farmer has in managing his land can be seen in the water that leaves his farm. So if the water leaving his farm is dirty, it's taken silt, soil, any chemicals he applied, whatever it is, downstream. That's a bad situation. But if the water running off his land is fairly clear, it looks like he's done a good job of keeping soil in place. And so the farmers are the stewards. The vast majority of the land is under the ownership of farmers or under the care of farmers. And so they're the stewards of the land. And so this idea of regenerative agriculture says we can not only build that sponge to capture that water, but when we do, we actually make the land better. We reduce flooding, and by holding water, we reduce droughts. The same soil that creates floods is the same soil that creates droughts. If you don't hold the water, it dries out quick, right? So what I want people to understand is farmers are the stewards. We have to train farmers to do better. Some of them a lot of them are good. Some of them can do a lot better. But then the next generation that goes out, they become extension agents and 4-H agents and work at the co-op. They work wherever they work. Agriculture affects their lives. And so what can we do so they understand how to be better stewards of that land? Now, the big thing is not only do they have to be stewards, but they got to make a profit doing it.
Yeah.
And that is where sometimes we get a little bit of challenge.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that was a long answer to your question. I don't even know what you asked.
Well, it was a very broad
yeah.
question. So
It's a complicated, delicate balance, it sounds like.
It is. And so the farmer, you have to remember the farmer is a biologist. He's a chemist. He's a veterinarian. He's an engineer. He's into marketing. He's got to do a lot of different things. And so we place all these responsibilities on him, and the good ones do a great job, and others struggle in some of these areas. But he actually ends up has to know more about, he has to know some things about different disciplines because he's applying all these STEM fields to his business. Yeah.
Well, I grew up in this area, and I think it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. And I live in White County, so driving back and forth to Tech, I see a lot of family farms being turned into subdivisions, and it makes me a little sad. But it sounds like earlier you were talking about how there was that trend where children didn't stay on the family farm, but agriculture adapted. Should we be concerned, or is it just you're finding new ways to use less land, I guess, for the same production?
Yes. So the land that I would be really concerned about is where cities like Des Moines, Iowa, are covering up high quality soil, really high quality soil. That's a concern. There's only so much of that really good soil. Iowa's one of those places. Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. The interesting thing about Tennessee, there's a website people can go to called U.S. Drought Monitor. And go back to 2012 and look where the drought was. Massive drought across the United States. You know where there really wasn't much of a drought? Cookeville, Tennessee. I got here in August of 12, and in that year, I just estimated rainfall because it was somewhere around 85 to 95 inches of rain that next month. My family back in Missouri were suffering under drought, as many were. That's the one thing about Tennessee we take for granted is how much fresh water falls on this land and what we do with that water that's here. But Cookeville, Tennessee, essentially is never in drought. And when I say never, you get a little mild dry period, but you don't get drought. And so that's something about Tennessee. It's why it's pretty. It's going to rain. It's why we can keep cattle production up because the grass is here. But urbanization is certainly an issue as we see maybe a decent, let's say 50 acres or 80 acres or 100 acres. And I don't know how to stop it, but they're going to split it up into small little, they call it ranchettes, 5 acres, 10 acres. And quite honestly, they'll never be in,
like for homesteading.
They'll never be in production again. Maybe for a little homestead, a few chickens, maybe a little garden, some raised beds. But in terms of being part of really the food system on a more commercial scale, certainly won't be. And that's not all bad, but Once you break those farms up into small farms, they'll almost never go back together again.
Yeah.
They'll never be used to raise livestock, or here's a nice sized cornfield or bean field. This is for cropping. Once it's in houses, it's pretty hard to go back.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Fennewald, I want to thank you for spending some time
Yes.
with us today. It's always a learning experience talking to professors across campus, and
Yes.
today was no exception.
And we usually end with this, one question of the most unusual or funny story that you might have, and you may not, and that's okay, anything that you want to share, but we figure the type of work you do, you may have some stories.
Yeah.
There's some stories. I've had successes and I've had failure. I shouldn't say failures. I've had some great learning opportunities at the farm. Things have, some things go well, some things don't go as planned or as expected. I think that the biggest success that I've had in my time here was having that grant along with Dr. Anderson in human ecology and Dr. Zach Williams, having that grant approved for the poultry house.
Okay.
Because that's the next chapter for the School of Agriculture, at least from an animal standpoint. And it's been needed for a long time. And I'm excited about the relationship that's been built with the poultry industry and its ability to attract students who want to learn about research. They might actually learn something about statistics while they're raising chickens, right? And animal welfare, nutrition, and ventilation, and all the things that go into doing well. And so that's the success I think that I'm most proud of. There's more to come. There's more to come.
Yes.
But I think that that's probably the one thing that's really that I find very fulfilling. And all the students who have been able to find careers, a lot of them were first generation college students. Their mom and dad never went, and now they came, they successfully got through college and found a career that's been very fulfilling.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we do thank you for stopping in and talking with us today. We have learned a lot. So thank you so much.